Hello everybody, and today I would like to talk to you about the USS Mitcher. This is a rank 2 battle rating 4.7 destroyer in the US deck tree, and in my opinion it is a major contender for the king of the low battle ratings. You would be highly forgiven for thinking this thing is rather fragile, as just looking at it, it only has 2 main guns, 2 separate turrets, 2 single barrels. But it's when you get to actually play this that you realize what a beast it actually is, not just due to the size of the ship, but all of its characteristics together make this thing an absolute monster that can fight basically any cruiser you can see and absolutely terrorize destroyers as long as you can stay out of their torpedo arcs, to say the least. This thing, if you do manage to avoid all the really heavy damage shots coming at it, can do just awesome, either sitting at range, continuously shelling the enemy ships and tearing them apart piece by piece, or if you want to really terrorize destroyers and PT boats and everything else, just go right into brawling range, try to stay, like I said, away from stuff that will just torpedo you, because there are a few downsides to this ship, and torpedoes are kind of one of them. But you can work around it at least. Those are more of a skill issue in some cases. A skill issue that in the background footage I do fail to remember. And it can be played around to make the ship very effective and basically control the matches at the low tiers. Like I said, even if you're against a cruiser that is a full rank higher than you, this thing can be an absolute terror to face. And it's led me to actually target these first in most matches just because they can be such a pain to either the ship that I'm playing, or I know they're going to be a pain to my teammates, so I try to take them out first and then work my way through the rest of the enemy team if I live that long, of course. I do want to discuss some of the pros and cons of this ship. It won't be quite a full review of this thing, as I'll save that for when I do an actual full line review of the US ships, of which currently I'm up to the Wyoming, and that thing is actually a lot of fun when played right, which is kind of a surprise to me, but on that I digress. This thing, it's a lot like the Atlanta for its tier in my opinion. If it gets played right in the right conditions, it will absolutely control the battlefield, but on the flip side, if it gets focused down, or honestly if you make one mistake sometimes, your match is over and somebody just slammed you home with a massive broadside or torpedo or something like that absolutely destroyed part of your ship. Really, this thing though, the strengths of it come down to the armament. It has an amazing armament for brawling. It has 2 127mm cannons. Like I said, it can fight even cruisers at its tier, and while that number is low, it makes up for that in rate of fire, reloading almost at 1.5 seconds per shot, which just endlessly pours lead down range, and you will be taking a lot of shells to feed it. But the 2 main batteries aren't totally what makes the armament on this ship. It also gets 2 pair of secondary guns. These are double 3-inch secondaries. Like I said, there's 2 of them. They're the same guns that are on the USS Roanoke, and they're just devastating to stuff at this tier. They fire with your main batteries on the same trajectory as the main batteries, and pretty much the same velocity in most cases, in my opinion. And they're just absolutely, like I said, devastating to most things you're going to see. The HE that they fire makes up for any lack of module damage that you get firing the SAP from the main battery 127s, or even if you're firing HE out of both, you can almost guarantee that the enemy ship won't have any guns or modules on its deck by the time you're done, just due to your sheer rate of fire and the massive amount of shot that you're putting down range. These 3-inch guns reload extremely fast. They're clip fed, I believe, so when you first open up on them you have an amazing burst, and then they'll slow down once they run out of rounds and just fire single shots over and over a little bit faster than your main batteries, I do believe. So even if you stop firing, they'll reload and then you get that initial burst again. And it absolutely tears stuff apart. It is almost impressive. It also gets some 20mm AA guns that do tear anything apart that get within their range, and they do have a decent range of engagement, but they do have some downsides that I'm going to touch on when I do get to the cons of this ship. So they're fairly reliable, let's put it that way. The other part of the offensive armament of the ship that makes it so deadly is it ranges targets incredibly quickly. You're almost never going to be waiting for this thing to update a range or range in an enemy ship, and this just lets you swap targets quickly or adjust your aim very often to keep your shells on target, which, like I said, if you're circling out at range and just shelling an enemy ship down while they try to hit you, they may have a slow update time for their shells, making your maneuvers very effective, whereas your maneuvers aren't throwing off your aim because your ship is updating its range basically every time you fire. It is absolutely insane to play, and when you switch over to another destroyer after this, it's going to make you really miss it. Other than that, the other thing that makes this thing really good against other destroyers is its size. It's one of the largest US destroyers in size in game at the moment, and it does have slightly more crew than the other destroyers in the tree, which helps you live a little bit longer if you get in a fight with, say, a gearing or something similar. So that's definitely going for you. And due to its American shell arcs and the taller stature of this ship, which is very noticeable when you spawn in and you're just towering over everything else, I mean, it's almost a cruiser. You can fire over lots of terrain that the smaller destroyers can't, which will surprise a lot of people when suddenly there's an island that they've never seen anybody fire over before, and you're absolutely destroying them with 3-inch batteries and your 127s over the top of it. And on top of that, despite its size, when it's at speed, it can throw itself around pretty decently with its rudder. It really is agile if you're dodging with your turning rather than trying to stop and start like other destroyers can do, just due to its size and maneuverability. And speaking of that maneuverability, it's also one of the faster US destroyers, moving along at a brisk 83 kilometers an hour. And I know that's kind of a backwards concept. I'm using metric with an American ship, but that's what War Thunder defaults to, so that's what I'm sticking to. This thing excels, like I said, at circling at long range to dodge enemy fire, just due to its fast update time on its ranging and its good maneuvering. But it does have its downsides. One of those, like I said, being the stop-start thing. But first I want to get into the low number of main batteries and how that's kind of a downside for it. If you do get into a brawl with an enemy ship and they shoot out your front battery, suddenly half your firepower is gone, and there's a good chance that since the 3-inch guns are so close to that front battery and so close to the rear battery, they're gone too. So half the firepower on your ship is immediately stripped from, say, one enemy shell. So that's kind of a downside. They do repair fairly quickly compared to other ships, but you're still going to be down half your firepower, and that's pretty detrimental, especially if you're maneuvering and you could only use half of it in the first place. The front armament can also be blocked at close range, just due to the curvature of the bow. So if you're up close and straight off the bow, which I do show in the gameplay behind this, it just won't shoot. It's blocked by your bow just because it curves up, and your ship's so tall your guns can't depress through it. So you really don't want people to get close to your bow and have to try to fight them off. In the background I kind of scare them off, and thankfully a teammate helps out and lobs some shells in, but it's definitely a situation you don't want to be in. And another thing with the armament, the high shell arcs, while they do benefit you in some cases, they make long-range engagements extremely difficult. You have to lead your shells extremely far and have to get very good at it. Even though you can continuously fire these shells over and over and over, eventually you're going to run out, or eventually the enemy ship is going to fire back. And if you're not dodging by then, you're in trouble because maybe your shells haven't hit yet. The high shell arcs have a long travel time, so it makes it very hard to figure out your lead initially, and walking your shells towards them just means you're not doing damage yet. So it's definitely a detriment. This thing does get torpedoes, but they're basically hull mounted and there's only a pair on either side. They're extremely slow torpedoes. I really wouldn't suggest bringing them. It's just another point at which your ship will just explode because it's ammunition sitting there. Really don't suggest them, as they have really weird fire arcs. There's very limited situations where they could be actually useful to you, and like I said, not worth bringing. The lack of useful torpedoes does hurt you when you're fighting heavily armored ships. Like, I believe this thing could see like Graf Spee, but your shells do make up for it in most cases, and you can also disengage because this thing is extremely fast. The ship does get anti-sub rockets, which seem pretty cool, and you would expect, you know, you got a rocket launcher, you could use it on other ships. But they're pretty much worthless. I've never seen anybody use them effectively, even though I've seen people try to use them. Rarely, obviously. And I've tried to use them and I can't figure them out. So I think they're really made just for anti-sub duty, and you shouldn't really expect to use them at all, so don't even bother bringing them. Because like I said, it's just more ammo for you to get blown up by, because it's just sitting on your ship doing nothing. Getting to my comment about the anti-aircraft guns, the AI gunners on these 20mm AA guns tend to underlead and not really adjust, and it seems to be fairly consistent with that. So if you do get in a situation where you need to swat some planes down, and maybe you have a second where you're not firing your main batteries, I would highly suggest taking over from them, because there's a good chance they're not going to hit. I'm not sure if it's something that War Thunder needs to tweak with the AI gunners, because I did have this ship on a fully upgraded crew as per anti-aircraft targeting. And I know the AI gunners are typically considered very blind, but you would think they'd adjust after a little bit, so I wouldn't suggest fully relying on them. As per maneuverability, this thing is, due to its size really, extremely sluggish to slow down and somewhat slow to speed up. So it makes start-stop dodging really ineffective with this ship, because you're going to coast a lot further than you think, and you're not going to slow down enough to dodge any enemy fire. So I would highly suggest using turning to dodge instead, because like I said, it's a very good turning ship, and the cruiser size of this thing just doesn't make the change in speed worth it. This thing does, due to its speed and size, have a wider turning radius. It plays more like a small cruiser. I wouldn't say this hurts you when you're dodging. I would say this hurts you when you're trying to maneuver away from islands, friendly ships, or torpedoes. You have a lot wider turning radius than you think. You may end up beaching yourself, you may end up running into said torpedo and sinking, you may bump off a few ally ships, but I would definitely, when you're playing this thing, have the mindset that you are a mini cruiser. You are going to just sit there and gun brawl stuff, you're not going to turn well, you're not going to stop, or I guess you're going to turn well, but you're going to turn wide. You're not going to be able to stop, but you're going to be able to tear everything down in front of you like you're a miniature Atlanta, really, and just be a terror of the seas. But that's my full review of this ship, and hopefully you guys see it as just as broken as I do. I think it could probably move up in BR just slightly. Maybe folder the Trenton, stick something in under the Fletcher, between the Fletcher and this thing, and kick this up to maybe 5.0, because it is a very, very effective ship in the right hands. But honestly, I'm not privy to the stats that Wargaming has on this thing as per its overall win rate and loss rate and all that stuff, or maybe I just don't know where to see that. And I think it could honestly use a little bump up in BR if I'm perfectly honest. But I'm curious what you guys think about it and what your opinions of the ship are. Let me know down in the comments, leave a like if you did like the video, and I'll see you next time. Good luck out there.